I worked 18 hours a day for my wife's family, carrying their empire on my back. When my father died, I asked for just 4 days off to bury him. They laughed. Choose work or family, my father-in-law said. I did not argue, I chose. And they paid for it. It started on a Tuesday night. I sat alone in my spacious office at the headquarters of Sterling Corporation in the heart of bustling Chicago. The harsh white neon lights cast down on my desk, making everything around me feel colder than ever. My name is Jayden, 34 years old, the chief operating officer of this corporation. Over the past 6 years, I had poured all my youth and energy into this place, turning it into a colossal machine that no one could stop. But tonight, the machine felt like a cage. My phone vibrated against the mahogany. It was my brother Marcus. I picked up, dread pooling in my stomach. Jayden, he is gone. Marcus's voice cracked. Dad passed away an hour ago. The world stopped. Arthur, the man who raised us with grease, stained hands and a heart of gold, was gone. Cancer had tormented him for 2 full years, and I had been too busy making money for the Sterlings to be there. Tears welled up, but I forced myself to swallow them back. I need to go home, I whispered. I hung up and dialed Silas Sterling, the chairman, my father-in-law. My heart pounded furiously, not because of work anxiety, but because of the agony tearing me apart inside. Silas, I said, keeping my voice steady. My father passed away this morning. I am requesting 4 days off to return to Ohio for the funeral. I will hand over all tasks to the team. Silence stretched on the line. I expected condolences, a polite remark. Instead, I heard a heavy sigh. Jayden, listen to me. Put your personal matters aside. The quarterly merger is in a sensitive period. You cannot just leave. The family is all away on vacation. No one can replace you. You have to stay. I was stunned. But Silas, it is only 4 days. I will arrange everything. He cut me off, his voice sharp as a knife. I said no. Your responsibility is here with the corporation. All personal matters must be set aside. Even your father's funeral is no exception. The company needs you to keep it running, not to deal with emotional issues. The call ended in absolute coldness. I sat motionless. My father was gone, and I was not allowed to say goodbye. I had one lifeline left. I dialed my wife, Elena. She was in St. Bart's, enjoying the vacation I paid for. Elena. My father died, I said, desperate for a shred of empathy. Silas refused my leave. Please, talk to him. I just need 4 days. The line crackled with static and the sound of distant music. Jayden, are you serious? You are calling me during cocktails. He is my dad, Elena. Look. I am sorry he died, but a mechanic's funeral has nothing to do with me. Do not embarrass me by leaving the company in a lurch. Daddy is right. You need to focus. She hung up. Not a single question. Not a breath of sorrow. I stared at the black screen. I realized I was utterly alone in my marriage. They did not see me as a husband or a son-in-law. I was an asset. A high-paid slave in a tailored suit. I looked around the office, the gleaming glass walls, the desk piled high with documents. This had once been a place I was proud of, where I thought I was building my future. But now, it felt like nothing more than a luxurious prison. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break, but a quiet, final severance. I opened my laptop. I did not check the merger file. I opened a new email address to the board of directors. Subject: resignation. Body: I, Jayden, hereby resign from my position as Chief Operating Officer effective immediately. I hit send. I closed the laptop. I took my security badge off my belt and left it on the polished mahogany desk. I walked out of the office, past the confused night staff, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, Bearing the view of the Sterling Empire, I felt a terrifying, electric surge of freedom. The elevator doors slid open to the subterranean chill of the parking garage, the air damp and heavy with the smell of concrete. I walked to my car, my footsteps echoing in the silence, each strike of my heel against the pavement feeling like a hammer, driving a nail into the coffin of my former life. I threw my suit jacket onto the passenger seat and loosened my tie, gasping for air, as if I had been holding my breath for 6 years. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my hands. I peeled out of the garage, merging onto the highway, just as the city lights of Chicago began to blur into streaks of white and red. My phone sat in the cup holder, vibrating relentlessly against the plastic. The screen lit up, piercing the darkness of the cabin. A message from Silas flashed across the glass. "Get back here immediately. You are making a mistake that will cost you everything." Then another from Elena. "Have you lost your mind? Mother is crying. Come home and fix this." I glanced at the messages, the blue light reflecting in my eyes, but I did not reach for the device. For the first time in a decade, I did not reply. I let them buzz. I let them demand. Every vibration was a ghost from a world I was speeding away from at 80 miles per hour. The further I drove, the less power they held. The grip of the Sterling Empire, usually so tight around my throat, was loosening with every mile marker that flew past. The drive was long, a solitary tunnel through the night. Slowly, slept. The towering steel skeletons of the city gave way to the flat, open expanse of the Midwest. The sky turned from the sickly orange glow of urban light pollution to a deep, bruising purple, and finally to the soft gray of dawn. By the time I crossed the state line into Ohio, the sun was bleeding over the horizon, painting the cornfields in strokes of gold and rust. I rolled down the window. The air here was different. It did not smell of exhaust and ozone. It smelled of damp earth, drying stalks, and cold morning dew. It was the scent of my childhood, sharp and aching. I pulled into the gravel lot of St. Peter's Church, the stones crunching loudly beneath my tires. The small white building stood stark against the brightening sky, its paint peeling slightly near the foundation. It was humble, weathered, and enduring. Everything Chicago was not. A figure stood on the wooden steps, hugging a black coat against the morning chill. Marcus. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. He was broader in the shoulders, his face carrying the same square jaw and kind eyes as our father. He watched me step out of the car, his expression unreadable. I walked toward him, my legs stiff, my expensive Italian shoes coated instantly in gray dust. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. My throat felt like it was full of broken glass. "Marcus," I choked out. He did not say a word. He simply descended the steps in 2 long strides and pulled me into a crushing embrace. The moment his arms wrapped around me, the dam broke. The stoicism I had perfected in the boardroom, the icy reserve I used to survive Elena's dinner parties, it all shattered. I buried my face in my brother's shoulder and sobbed. I cried for my father. I cried for the years I had wasted. I cried for the brother I had left behind to carry the burden alone. "I am sorry," I whispered into his coat. "I am so sorry." Marcus held me tighter, his hand patting my back in a steady rhythm. "You are here now, Jayden. That is what matters." We stood there for a long time as the wind whipped around us, stripping away the last veneer of the Sterling executive. When we finally pulled apart, Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Come on," he said, his voice thick. "Let us go to the shop." The drive to the repair shop was short. We parked in front of the corrugated metal building that had been my father's second home. The sign above the bay doors was faded, the red letters of Arthur's Auto Repair, bleached pink by decades of sun. I unlocked the side door with the key Marcus handed me. The smell hit me instantly. Old oil, gasoline, sawdust, and stale coffee. It was the perfume of honest labor. My heart twisted in my chest. Inside, everything was exactly as he had left it. A half-rebuilt transmission sat on the main workbench. Ragged towels were draped over the vise. His calendar on the wall was still turned to the current month, with appointments scrawled in his shaky block lettering. I walked over to his tool chest. It was a massive red cabinet, scratched and dented, covered in stickers from parts suppliers. I ran my fingers over the metal. I remembered being 10 years old, standing on a crate so I could reach the top drawer, handing him wrenches while he explained the difference between metric and standard. "He worked here until the end, didn't he?" I asked, my voice echoing in the quiet space. Marcus nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "He was here 3 days ago. He could barely stand, slept, but he wanted to finish Mrs. Higgins's break job because he knew she couldn't afford to go anywhere else." The guilt hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. 3 days ago, while my father was struggling to turn a wrench to help a neighbor, I was sitting in a climate-controlled boardroom discussing profit margins and synergy. I had been too busy to call. Too busy to drive 5 hours. Too busy building an empire for people who would not give me 4 days to bury the man who taught me how to work. I looked at the oil stains on the concrete floor. I could see the ghost of him, bent over a fender, wiping sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained forearm. I had traded this reality, this grit and love, for a glass office and a family that looked at me with disdain. I picked up a wrench from the bench. It was heavy, cold, and real. "He asked for you," Marcus said softly. "Every day." "He was not angry, Jayden. He just missed you." The wrench slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the concrete. The sound sharp and accusing in the silence. I gripped the edge of the workbench, my knuckles turning white, staring at the calendar where he had written his final tasks. I had chosen work over family, just as Silas had demanded. And now, standing in the quiet tomb of my father's life, I realized the cost was far higher than I could ever afford to pay. I woke up in the narrow twin bed of my childhood room, the rusty springs creaking familiarly under my weight. Sunlight filtered through the faded curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. It was a stark contrast to the blackout shades and climate-controlled sterility of my Chicago penthouse. Today was the day we put my father in the ground. We drove to the cemetery in a heavy silence. I expected a quiet affair. My father was a mechanic, a man who spoke little and worked much. I assumed there would be a few neighbors, perhaps some old drinking buddies from the Legion Hall. But when we arrived at St. Peter's, the crowd spilled off the manicured grass and onto the gravel path. There were men in clean work shirts, teachers, the town grocer, and entire families I did not recognize. The service was modest, but the grief was loud. Mrs. Higgins slept. The woman whose brakes he had fixed in his final days gripped my hand with frail, trembling fingers. "Your daddy fixed my heater in the dead of winter for free," she told me, tears caught in the deep wrinkles of her cheeks. "He saved us, Jayden. He was a saint." Man after man shook my hand, their grips firm and calloused, their eyes wet. They spoke of loans he never asked to be repaid. They spoke of cars fixed on Sunday nights so single mothers could get to work on Monday mornings. They spoke of a man who listened when no one else would, slept I stood by the open grave, looking at the simple pine casket, and the contrast hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I had attended galas with Silas Sterling, where senators and CEOs lined up to kiss his ring. But behind Silas's back, they sneered. They feared his power, his leverage, and his lawyers. But they despised the man. Here, under the gray Ohio sky, there was no power. There was no leverage. There was no networking. There was only love. My father, a man with dirt permanently etched into his fingerprints, had commanded a respect that Silas Sterling's billions could never buy. Silas died a little every day in the hearts of those who knew him. But Arthur lived on. After the earth was shoveled and the crowd finally dispersed, Marcus and I drove to the town center. We had an appointment with Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had served the town for 40 years. His office was a small, dusty room above the bakery, smelling faintly of yeast and old paper. I sat in the creaky leather chair, bracing myself. I assumed there would be debts. Medical bills from the cancer treatments that insurance did not cover. A second mortgage on the shop. I had my checkbook ready in my inner pocket. I was ready to pay whatever it cost to clear my father's name before I severed ties with everything and vanished. Mr. Henderson shuffled a stack of files and adjusted his spectacles. Arthur was a careful man, he began, his voice dry and professional. He wanted to ensure his boys were taken care of. I nodded, waiting for the bad news. Just tell us what he owes, I said, my voice tight. I will handle it. Mr. Henderson looked up, confused. Owes? Jayden, your father did not have any debts. He paid off the house 15 years ago. The shop is free and clear. He slid a thick binder across the scarred oak desk. This is the portfolio he managed. I opened it. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers, expecting to see a few $1,000s in a savings account. Instead, I saw Vanguard funds. I saw blue chip stocks bought 30 years ago and never touched. I saw compound interest quietly working in the dark while my father drove a 20-year-old truck and ate Bologna sandwiches. I froze. I looked at the bottom line. Then I looked at Marcus. He was reading over my shoulder, his mouth slightly open. $1,100,000, Mr. Henderson stated calmly. To be split evenly between Jayden and Marcus Ramirez. The room spun. $1 million. He saved everything, Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. He wore the same boots for a decade. He never took a vacation. He saved it all for us. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. I thought of Silas Sterling, who leveraged every asset to the hilt to fund a lifestyle of yachts and private jets, constantly screaming about cash flow. Slept. And then I thought of my father, eating dinner alone in the back of a cold shop, quietly building a fortress of security for his sons. He was not a poor mechanic. He was a king disguised in denim. Mr. Henderson handed us 2 cashier's checks. $550,000 each. I held the slip of paper. It felt heavier than lead. This was not just money. This was his sweat. His aching back. The winters he endured without complaining. It was his final act of protection. For 6 years, I had lived in terror of losing my job at Sterling Corporation because I thought I needed their money to survive the lifestyle. Alina demanded. I had let them humiliate me, own me, and silence me because I was afraid of being poor. And all this time, my father had a safety net waiting for me. He had given me the one thing Silas could not buy. Freedom. I looked at the check again. It was permission to say no. It was the key to the cage. I folded the check and placed it in my jacket pocket, right next to my heart. The fear that had dictated my life since I left Ohio evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I did not need the Sterlings. I never did. We walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright afternoon sun. Marcus looked at me, his eyes searching my face. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," I said, staring at the bank across the street, "that I have been chasing the wrong kind of wealth." Marcus nodded slowly. "We have the means to start over, Jayden. To do whatever we want." I touched the pocket where the check lay. I did not just want to start over. I wanted to make things right. And I knew exactly where I had to go to do it. "Let us go home," I said. "We need to talk." We got into the car, the engine rumbling to life. As we drove back toward the house, a plan began to form in the back of my mind. It was dangerous. It was reckless. But with $500,000 and my father's ghost at my back, I felt invincible. We pulled into the driveway as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the porch. I looked at Marcus. "I have something to tell you," I said. "About the company. About everything." Marcus killed the engine and looked at me, his expression darkening. "Good," he said. "Because I have something to tell you too. And you are not going to like it." We sat at the scarred wooden table, in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of fried chicken and silence. The only light came from the single, yellow bulb dangling above us, casting long, wavering shadows against the peeling wallpaper. It was a far cry from the crystal chandeliers and course tasting menus of the Sterling Gala dinners. But the food tasted better. It tasted like home. I pushed my plate away, the ceramic scraping against the wood. "I need to tell you why I really came back," I said, staring at my hands. "It was not just for the funeral. I resigned." Marcus looked up, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "You quit?" I nodded. I told him everything. I told him about the 18-hour days. The way Silas would call me at 2 in the morning to scream about a 0.5% drop in quarterly projections. The way Elena treated me like a fashion accessory that could be put back in the box when I was not useful. I told him about the 4 days. The refusal. The laughter. "I was not a partner, Marcus," I whispered, the shame burning my throat. "I was a high-paid servant. I sold my soul for a penthouse view. And when I asked for a shred of humanity, they spat in my face." Marcus listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every sentence. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man confirming a suspicion he had held for a long time. When I finished, the kitchen fell silent again, save for the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His expression shifted. The brotherly warmth evaporated, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a prosecutor. "I am glad you told me that, Jayden," he said, his voice low and steady, "because now I can tell you what I have been working on for the last 18 months. I frowned. "You work in economic crimes. What does that have to do with me?" Marcus looked toward the darkened window, as if checking for listeners, before turning his gaze back to me. "We have an active file on Sterling Corporation." My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of file?" "Tax fraud on a massive scale," he said. "Labor violations. Wage theft. We have witnessed testimony from 3 former mid-level accountants and a warehouse foreman. What we know, Silas is funneling money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands to avoid federal taxes. We know he is classifying full-time employees as contractors to deny them benefits. We know he is cooking the books to artificially inflate the stock price before the merger." I stared at him, stunned. I knew Silas was ruthless, but I had always assumed he was careful. "You know all of this. Then why is he not in handcuffs?" "Because we do not have the smoking gun," Marcus said, frustration seeping into his tone. "We have the smoke. We have patterns. But we do not have the original, unedited ledgers. Silas keeps two sets of books. The ones he shows the IRS, and the real ones. The real ones are on an air-gapped server in the headquarters. Without physical access to that server, the case is circumstantial. Any good lawyer could tear it apart. We need the raw data. He looked at me, his eyes locking onto mine. We need an insider. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. The air-gapped server. I knew exactly where it was. It was in a server room on the 42nd floor that required biometric clearance. Only 3 people had that clearance. Silas, the chief financial officer, and the chief operating officer. Me. I realized why Marcus had been so intense. He was not just listening to my story, he was vetting a potential asset. "You want me to go back," I said, the words tasting like ash. Marcus reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Jayden, listen to me. If you walk away now, you are free. You have the money Dad left us. You can start over. No one would blame you. But Silas will keep doing this. He will keep destroying families. He will keep stealing from his workers. And he will get away with it, because no one else can get close enough to stop him." I pulled my hand back and stood up, pacing the small kitchen. Go back. The thought made my stomach churn. I had just escaped. I had just tasted freedom. Going back meant putting the chains on willingly. It meant looking Silas in the eye and submitting to his abuse again. It meant living in that cold apartment with Elena and pretending to be the husband she wanted. But then, I thought of my father. I thought of his hands, cracked and blighting from honest work. I thought of the way Silas had laughed at his death. Choose work or family. If I walked away, Silas won. If I walked away, I was just another victim. I stopped pacing and turned to face my brother. If I go back, I cannot just walk in and ask for my job. Silas is paranoid. If I look confident, he will suspect something. Marcus nodded slowly. You have to feed his ego. You have to make him believe he broke you. I took a deep breath. I have to be the broken dog, I said. I have to crawl back. I have to tell him I made a mistake. That I am nothing without him. That I was emotional and irrational and I need his forgiveness. It was a sickening thought. To debase myself before the man who had dishonored my father. But it was the only way. Silas loved power. He loved crushing people. If I offered him my dignity on a silver platter, he would be too busy gloating to watch his back. I can get the data, I said, my voice hardening. I know the encryption protocols. I know his schedule. I can copy the real ledgers onto an encrypted drive. Marcus stood up, towering over the table. It is dangerous, Jayden. If he catches you, he will destroy you. He will plant evidence. He will ruin your life before we can even file charges. You will be alone in the belly of the beast. I am not alone, I said, touching the pocket where my father's check lay. I have $1 million of screw you money and a prosecutor on speed dial. Marcus cracked a grim smile. We will set up a dead drop for the data. You do not send anything electronically. You copy it, you encrypt it, and we meet in person. No paper trail. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the strategy. The timing was critical. I had to return before the quarterly merger meeting next week. I had to convince Elena to let me back into the apartment. I had to become the perfect, submissive soldier. By the time we finished, the kitchen clock read 3 in the morning. I felt exhausted, but for the first time in years, my mind was clear. I was not going back to work. I was going to war. I looked at the phone on the counter. It was time to make the first move. I had to send the email that would start the charade. I had to beg. I picked up the phone and typed a message to Silas. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of suppressing my rage. Silas, I wrote. I made a terrible mistake. Grief clouded my judgment. Please. We need to talk. I hit send. The phone swooshed, carrying my surrender through the digital ether. Now, we waited. I looked at Marcus. The trap is set, I said. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the dark window. Just remember, Jayden. Once you walk back through those doors, you are an actor. If you break character, even for a second, it is over. I stared into the black glass of the window, seeing my own reflection. I did not recognize the man staring back. He looked dangerous. I will not break, I said. A moment later, my phone buzzed. A single word from Silas. Tomorrow. The glass doors of Sterling Plaza slid open with a soft hiss, admitting me back into the climate-controlled air of the lobby. The security guard, a man I had greeted every morning for 6 years, hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. He had heard the rumors. Everyone had. The prodigal son-in-law had returned, tail tucked between his legs. I walked to the elevator, my badge weighing heavy in my pocket. When I swiped it against the reader, the light turned green. I was back in the system. I rode the elevator to the penthouse suite. The doors opened to reveal the executive reception area, silent and imposing. Silas was waiting for me in his office. Elena was there too, sitting on the leather sofa, scrolling through her phone. She did not look up when I entered. Silas sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers. He let me stand there for a full minute, the silence stretching until it was thin and brittle. So, he said finally, his voice dripping with satisfaction. The wandered returns. I lowered my head, staring at the polished toes of my shoes. I practiced this moment in the mirror for hours. I had to kill the part of me that wanted to leap across the desk and strangle him. I had to be pathetic. I made a mistake, Silas, I said, keeping my voice low and trembling. My father's death, it broke me. I was not thinking clearly. I realized as soon as I got to Ohio that I do not belong there. I belong here. This company is my life. Elena finally looked up, her eyes cold. You made a scene. Jayden, you left us right before the merger. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to explain your absence to the board? I had to tell them you were having a nervous breakdown. I am sorry, Elena, I said. I will make it up to you. I will work double shifts until the merger is complete. I will fix everything. Silas stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped in front of me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. You are damn right you will, he spat. You are back on probation. One mistake, one mistake, and you are out on the street. And do not think for a second you are getting your old salary back immediately. You have to earn your place at this table again. I nodded, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. Thank you, Silas. Thank you for the second chance. He smirked, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. Get to work. The merger files are a mess. I walked out of his office, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had done it. I was inside. That night, the humiliation continued at home. I entered our penthouse, the place that had once felt like a sanctuary, now feeling like a museum of a dead marriage. Elena was drinking wine in the living room. Do not even think about coming into the master bedroom, she said, not looking away from the television. You sleep on the couch until I decide otherwise. And Jayden. I stopped in the hallway, gripping the handle of my suitcase. Yes, try not to look so pathetic tomorrow. It reflects poorly on me. I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The discomfort kept me awake, which was good. I needed to be awake. I had work to do. The next morning, the real work began. I resumed my 18 Our days, but the dynamic had shifted. Before, I worked hard to build the company. Now, I worked hard to hollow it out. During the day, I was the model employee. I reorganized the merger spreadsheets, calmed the nervous investors, and took Silas's verbal abuse with a nod and a smile. I fetched his coffee. I listened to his rants about lazy workers. I fed his ego until he was fat and blind with self-importance. But at night, when the rest of the floor went dark, I became a ghost. The server room was located on the 42nd floor. It housed the physical drives for the company's deepest financial records. Access required a biometric scan and a key card. My clearance had not been revoked. Silas was too arrogant to think I would turn on him. He thought he owned me. It was 3 a.m. on a Thursday when I made my move. The cleaning crew had already passed through. The office was a tomb of silence. I walked to the server room door, my pulse thumping in my ears. I placed my hand on the scanner. A green laser swept across my palm. The lock disengaged with a heavy clack. I slipped inside. The room was cold, filled with the drone of cooling fans and the blinking lights of the server racks. I moved to the main terminal and plugged in the encrypted drive Marcus had given me. I began the transfer. Files flashed across the screen. Cayman Island accounts. Shell corporations set up in Nevada. Wire transfers labeled as consulting fees that went directly into Silas's personal trust. It was all there. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering. He was not just skimming off the top, he was bleeding the company dry. I heard a noise. The sound of a heavy door opening down the hallway. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the plush carpet. My heart stopped. I looked at the screen. The transfer bar was at 80%. The footsteps got closer. I could not pull the drive, it would corrupt the data. I could not hide. The room was a glass fishbowl. The door to the server room opened. Silas stood there. He was wearing his overcoat, holding a briefcase. He had come back for something. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell are you doing in here, Jayden?" Panic flooded my veins, hot and sharp. This was it. The end. I forced my hands to stay steady on the keyboard. I did not pull away. I turned to look at him, keeping my face a mask of exhausted dedication. "I was checking the pension fund allocations for the merger," I said, my voice smooth. "The numbers in the report you sent to the board did not match the internal ledger. I thought there was a glitch in the server. I came down to verify the raw data, so you do not look incompetent in front of the shareholders tomorrow." Silas paused. His suspicion warred with his vanity. The idea that he might have made a mistake was impossible to him, but the idea that I was obsessively protecting his reputation was exactly what he wanted to believe. "And?" he asked. "Is there an error?" I pointed to the screen, where the file transfer window was thankfully hidden behind a spreadsheet I had quickly pulled up. "No, sir," I lied. "It was just a formatting issue. I fixed it. The reports are perfect. You are in the clear." Silas grunted, adjusting his collar. "Good. You are finally showing some initiative. Do not stay all night. You look terrible." He turned and walked out. I waited and heard the elevator ding before I collapsed back into the chair, gasping for air. My shirt was soaked through with sweat. The transfer bar hit 100%. I pulled the drive and scrolled through the final folder I had copied. It was a file simply labeled Restructuring Strategy. I opened it. It was not a strategy. It was a hit list. Silas was planning to declare bankruptcy immediately after the merger. The documents detailed a plan to liquidate the pension fund, to pay off secured creditors that were actually shell companies owned by him. slapped. He was going to wipe out the retirement savings of 3,000 employees, including the security guard, who let me in every morning to pocket another $40 million. He was going to steal their lives just like he had tried to steal mine. I stared at the screen, my fear vanishing, replaced by a cold, white, hot rage. I was not just saving myself anymore. I was holding the knife that would cut the throat of this monster. I ejected the drive and put it in my pocket. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the server room. The building was silent, but in my head, I could already hear the sirens. I have it, I whispered to the empty hallway. I have everything. I walked out of the building with the encrypted drive burning a hole in my pocket, the Chicago wind hitting my face like a baptism. I met Marcus at a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. I slid the drive across the table under a menu. He looked at me, his eyes tired but sharp. "Is it all there?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "The shell companies, the tax evasion, the plan to loot the pension fund." Marcus nodded, pocketing the drive. "It is done." 3 days later, the storm broke. It was a Tuesday morning, the day of the quarterly board meeting. Silas stood at the head of the massive oak conference room table, flanked by Elena and the general counsel. He was in the middle of presenting the falsified growth projections, his voice booming with confidence. I sat at the far end of the table, silent, my hands folded on top of a blank notepad. "Our synergy has never been stronger," Silas declared, gesturing to a graph that was a complete fabrication. "We are poised for a record-breaking year." The double doors at the back of the room burst open. Everyone turned. 12 men and women in FBI windbreakers marched in, their faces grim. Behind them came Marcus, wearing a suit I had never seen, looking every inch the prosecutor he was born to be. Silas stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his face flushing red. "You cannot just barge in here. Do you know who I am?" Marcus stepped forward, holding up a warrant. "Silas Sterling, you are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." The room erupted into chaos. Board members gasped, scrambling away from the table as if Silas were contagious. Elena stood up, her face pale. "This is a mistake!" she shrieked. "My father is innocent! Call our lawyers!" 2 agents moved in on Silas. He tried to pull away, but they spun him around and slammed him against the mahogany table, the sound of metal cuffs ratcheting shut echoing through the room. "Jayden!" Silas screamed, looking at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Do something! Tell them this is insane!" I remained seated. I did not blink. I did not speak. I watched the man who had denied me 4 days to bury my father get dragged out of his own castle in handcuffs. As they led him past me, Marcus stopped for a brief second. He did not look at me, but I saw the slightest nod. Then he was gone, following the suspect out the door. The collapse was swift and brutal. By the afternoon, the news had broken. Sterling Corporation stocks went into freefall, dropping 40% in 2 hours. The lobby was swarming with reporters. I sat in my office, watching the ticker on my screen turn red, a river of blood washing away the empire Silas had built on lies. My phone rang. It was not Elena. It was the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, asking for my cooperation. I gave it freely. The trial took place 6 months later. It was the biggest financial scandal in Chicago history. The courtroom was packed every day. I sat in the back row, wearing a simple gray suit, watching the drama unfold. Marcus was brilliant. He dissected the Sterling Empire piece by piece. He pulled up the documents I had stolen, the consulting fees, the offshore accounts, the pension theft strategy. He displayed them on a massive screen for the jury. Silas sat at the defense table, shrunken and gray. He had lost 20 pounds. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who knows he is finished. Elena sat behind him, weeping silently, her social standing evaporating with every piece of evidence presented. The defense tried to argue that Silas was unaware of the accounting errors, that he had been missold by subordinates. Marcus destroyed that argument with a single email chain I had pulled from the server. Silas explicitly ordering the CFO to bury the losses. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Silas to 25 years in federal prison. He ordered the immediate seizure of all personal assets to pay restitution to the victims, including the employees whose pensions he had tried to steal. Slept. The Sterling family fortune was wiped out in the blink of an eye. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of flashing cameras. I did not stop to give a statement. I pushed through the crowd, finding Marcus by his car. "We did it," he said, loosening his tie. I looked back at the courthouse. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The monster was in a cage. The debt was paid. The rain hammered against the floor, to ceiling windows of the penthouse, blurring the lights of Chicago into smears of gray and gold. The trial was over. The verdict read, but the silence in the apartment felt heavy, like the calm before a second, more violent storm. I stood by the window, watching the water streak down the glass. My suitcase was packed and waiting by the door. This place had never felt like a home. It was a stage set where I had performed the role of the grateful husband for 5 years. Tonight, the show was closing. A fist pounded on the door. It was not a polite knock. It was a demand. I checked my watch. Right on time. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Silas stood there, his expensive trench coat soaked through, his gray hair plastered to his forehead. Elena was right behind him, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. Her mother, usually the picture of icy composure, looked frail and trembling. They pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, bringing the smell of damp wool and desperation into the foyer. Silas marched into the living room and spun around, his face purple with a mixture of exhaustion and rage. "You incompetent coward," Silas roared, his voice cracking. "You sat there in that courtroom and watched them dismantle my life. You said you would fix the merger. You said the files were clean. How did the FBI get the server logs, Jayden? How did they get the unedited ledgers?" Elena threw her designer handbag onto the sofa and turned on me, her eyes wild. "Do you have any idea what is happening? They froze everything. The joint accounts, the trust funds, the offshore holdings. My credit cards were declined at the pharmacy today. I tried to buy anxiety medication, and I was humiliated." She stepped closer, jabbing a finger into my chest. "You are the chief operating officer. This happened on your watch. You were supposed to protect us. You were supposed to be the one person we could count on to handle the dirty work." Her mother chimed in, her voice shrill. "We took you in when you were nothing. We gave you a life most people only dream of. And when the walls started closing in, you did nothing. You let the wolves in the front door." I stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed, letting their accusations wash over me. It was fascinating to watch. Even now, stripped of their power, facing decades in prison and financial ruin, they still believed they were the masters and I was the servant. They still believed my purpose on this earth was to clean up their messes. "Fix it," Silas commanded, slamming his hand onto the marble countertop. "I do not care who you have to bribe. I do not care what strings you have to pull. You find a way to get those assets unfrozen. We need liquid capital to mount an appeal. Get on the phone with legal now. I looked at Silas, really looked at him. The titan of industry was gone. In his place stood a terrified old man who had never been told no in his entire life. I am not calling legal, Silas, I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the room like a razor. He blinked, stunned by my tone. Excuse me. I am not calling legal because there is nothing to appeal. The evidence is solid. The chain of custody is perfect. The witness testimony is corroborated by hard data. Silas narrowed his eyes. How do you know about the chain of custody? I walked over to the coffee table where I had placed 2 thick manila envelopes earlier that evening. I picked them up, weighing them in my hands. You asked how the FBI got the server logs, I said. You asked how they got the unedited ledgers from an air-gapped room on the 42nd floor. I took a step toward him. They did not hack the system, Silas. Someone walked into that room, bypassed the biometric scanner with a valid handprint, and copied the files onto an encrypted drive. Someone who knew exactly where you hid the bodies. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass. Elena looked at me, her mouth falling open. No. Silas took a step back, shaking his head. You. I tossed the first envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and came to rest at his feet. I gave Marcus the drive, I said. I was the confidential informant. I was the one who walked into the FBI field office 6 months ago. I was the one who wore a wire to the board meetings. Silas leapt as if he had been shot. He stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. You are a nothing. You are a mechanic's son. I made you. You did not make me, I replied, my voice rising for the first time. You used me. You worked me 18 hours a day. You threatened my career. You made me an accomplice to your crimes. And when the one person in this world who actually loved me died, you told me to get back to work. I pointed at him. You laughed at me, Silas. You told me to choose between work and family. So I did. I chose my family. I chose my brother. And I chose the memory of my father, a man who had more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire empire. Elena let out a sob, but it wasn't a sob of sorrow. It was a sob of terror. She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see an accessory. She saw the man who held her fate in his hands. Jayden. She pleaded, her voice trembling. You can't mean that. We are married. You can't send my father to prison. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You can recant. If you tell the judge you fabricated the evidence, they might let him go. Please. Do it for me. I looked at my wife. Even now, she was asking me to commit perjury to save her lifestyle. She didn't care about justice. She didn't care about the thousands of employees who lost their pensions. She only cared that her credit cards were declined. I handed her the second envelope. What is this? She whispered, her hands shaking as she took it. Open it. She tore open the seal and pulled out the papers. She scanned the first page, and her face went ghostly white. Divorce papers, I said. I signed them an hour ago. I am not asking for alimony. I am not asking for a share of the assets, mostly because there are no assets left. I just want out. Elena looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. But Jayden, I have nothing. If you leave me now, I will be on the street. Who will take care of me? I looked at her, and I felt a strange emotion. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was pity. You are 32 years old, Elena, I said. You have a master's degree you never used. You have health. You have freedom. My father raised 2 boys on a mechanic's wage in a Rust Belt town. I think you will figure it out. Silas roared, lunging for me. I will kill you. I will ruin you. I stepped aside easily, and he stumbled, catching himself on the sofa. He was weak, exhausted, and broken. Get out, I said. Silas straightened up, trying to summon the last shreds of his dignity. This is my apartment. The company pays the lease. The company is in receivership. I reminded him. The FBI seized the lease this morning. This apartment belongs to the federal government now. I am the only one allowed to be here, because I am a protected witness. You are trespassing. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I can call Agent Miller, I said. I am sure he would love to revoke your bail for harassing a witness. Or, you can leave. Silas stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked at the phone. Then at the door. The fight drained out of him. He realized, finally, that he had no cards left to play. He turned to the women. Come on. Alina looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only the panicked calculation of a survivor, realizing the lifeboat had just sailed away. Jayden, please, she whispered. I walked to the door and held it open. Goodbye, Elena. They shuffled out into the hallway, a procession of ghosts. Silas, the fallen king. Alina, the princess in rags. And her mother, a statue of silent judgment. They walked toward the elevator without looking back, their footsteps heavy on the carpet. I closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and exhaled. It was done. The final severance. I had cut the rot out of my life. I turned around and looked at the empty apartment. The rain was still falling, but the storm inside was over. I picked up my suitcase. I did not need to pack anything else. Everything in this apartment belonged to a man who no longer existed. I walked out the door, leaving the keys on the counter. I took the elevator down to the garage, got into my car, and drove out into the rainy Chicago night. I did not know exactly where I was going. But for the first time in 6 years, I knew I was driving towards something real. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring. It is finished, I said. Good, Marcus replied. Come home, brother. It is time to build. I stood on the steel gantry overlooking the main floor of Arthur Logistics. It was a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after the raid that had shattered the Sterling Empire. Below me, the warehouse hummed with a rhythm that was entirely different from the fear-soaked silence I had lived in for 6 years. Here, there was music playing over the loudspeakers. Forklift drivers waved to each other as they passed in the wide aisles. In the corner, the break room was full of laughter, not hushed whispers about layoffs. I touched the railing, feeling the vibration of honest work. We had opened the doors 8 months ago, fueled by the inheritance my father had secretly stockpiled. Marcus and I had pooled our shares, putting every cent into leasing this space and hiring the best people we knew. Many of them were refugees from Sterling. Sarah, the head of accounting who had been forced to cook books for Silas, now ran a department based on radical transparency. My phone buzzed. It was the front desk. Jayden, there is a woman here to see you. She says it is personal. I knew who it was before I even walked down the stairs. Elena stood in the small, sunlit reception area. She looked like a faded photocopy of the woman I had married. The designer heels were gone, replaced by sensible flats. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, lacking the expensive sheen of weekly salon visits. When she saw me, she straightened up, trying to summon a ghost of her old entitlement, but it crumbled almost instantly. Jayden, she said, her voice small. You look good. I stopped a few feet away. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her a seat. Hello, Elena. She fidgeted with the strap of her purse. I heard about the company. Arthur Logistics. It is doing well. I saw the article in the business journal. We are doing fine, I said neutrally. What do you want? She flinched at the directness. Things are hard, Jayden. Dad is in prison. Mom is living with her sister in a one-bedroom apartment. I am working as a receptionist at a dental office. It is not the life I was raised for. I waited. I knew the pitch was coming. I was thinking. She continued, stepping closer. You need a marketing director. I know this industry. I know the clients. We made a good team once. Maybe we could try again. Professionally. Or. She let the word hang there, heavy with implication. She was looking for a lifeboat. She wanted to climb back onto the pedestal I had built for myself. I looked at her, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. There was only the clarity of a man who knows exactly who he is. Elena, I said softly. This company is built on trust. It is built on the idea that people matter more than profits. That is why we are succeeding. I took a step back. You do not fit here. Her face fell. Her eyes welled up with tears, but they were tears of frustration, not regret. She was mourning her lost status, not our lost relationship. Jayden, please. I have nothing. You have your freedom, I said, repeating the words I had told her the night I left. That is more than my father had when he started. I turned to the receptionist. Please show Miss Sterling out. I walked back up the stairs without looking back. I heard the door close, and with it, the final echo of my past life faded away. I returned to the floor, where my employees were working hard, not because they were terrified of me, but because they knew I had their backs. We paid overtime. We offered full benefits. We gave bereavement leave without asking questions. And in return, our clients trusted us. We were stealing market share from the competitors not by being ruthless, but by being decent. That weekend, Marcus and I drove back to Ohio. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and wood smoke. We parked the truck at St. Peter's and walked to the small plot of land where the grass had finally grown over the scar in the earth. The headstone was simple. Arthur Ramirez, beloved father. We stood there for a long time in the silence. Marcus placed a fresh bouquet of white lilies on the stone. You know, Marcus said, staring at the name. If Silas had just said yes, none of this would have happened. I nodded. It was the great irony of my life. If Silas had given me those 4 days, I would have buried my father, grieved, and returned to Chicago. I would still be his servant. I would still be drowning in golden handcuffs. His cruelty was the key that unlocked my cage, I said. I knelt down and touched the cold granite of the headstone. I thought about the $1 million he had saved, dollar by dollar, slept, sacrificing his own comfort so we could have choices. I thought about the grease under his fingernails and the love in his heart. Thank you, Dad, I whispered. I thanked him for the money, yes. But mostly, I thanked him for the lesson. He had taught me that dignity is not something you buy. It is something you do. I stood up and looked at my brother. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the cemetery. We were free. We were building something real. And we were doing it together. Ready to go home? Marcus asked. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. I am already home. We turned and walked back toward the truck, leaving the dead to rest, and driving forward into a life that was finally, truly, our own.